I'm going to talk about data breaches, or as I talked about, I'm having this like the explosion of data breaches. Last year, they said it was like a year of a data breach. Some people call it an epidemic, some people call it a pandemic. It is just dramatic. In the next slide, this is from a few years back, but it will still give you an idea how from 2005 to 2013, the over 4,000 reported data breaches involved just hundreds of thousands of individual records, and 30% of those records were breached, became victims of identity theft. So it's one thing to have a data breach, and people often think that it's not going to result in identity theft. It's unlikely. That 30% figure is much higher now. It's over a third of the cases are impacted. And people often say, well, a month or two after the data breach, this has had no consequence, we haven't had any complaints. That's because people who steal data often sit on it for a prolonged period of time. It's not uncommon that they will sit on it for over a year and then make use of the data. So this is nothing that you want to have touch your life. There are, I heard from many victims of identity theft during my tenure as a commissioner, and it's heartbreaking, reliving and recreating all of the pieces of your life that you have to do. You have to completely cut off all of your credit cards and contact all the government departments to disengage your former social insurance number, your former OHIP number, whatever, and start afresh. Not only is it enormously time consuming, you have to really make the case. I always tell people, file a report of the case of identity theft. So people know that there's something behind what you're saying. If you go to a credit card, your credit card company, and there are all these transactions which you did not do, and thousands of dollars, you go to the credit card company and say, I didn't make these charges, they're false. How are you going to get them to believe you? I mean, this often happens. The company says, come on, you did it, you're trying to hide it. So I have told people in the past, call the police when you have a case of identity theft. Get an occurrence report, name, and then armed with the occurrence report, then go to the credit card companies and others and say, here's the definitive evidence, I reported this on such and such a date, and then it's much easier. The flow I have found is much easier after that. In the next slide, I just talk briefly about the percentage of companies. 43% of companies experienced a data breach in the last year, and this was a 10% increase from the previous year. And now it will be even higher than that. The size of the breaches are increasing. 80% of breaches have employee negligence as the root of their cause. So often it's insiders. And not just, they're also rogue employees, but the majority of the cases, 80% here, I think it's probably closer to 75% now, are just mistakes, things happen. You have to be so careful with identifiable data. And that's why in a short while, you'll see that I talk about the importance of data minimization. Once you've made use of the identifiable data that you needed for the purpose collected, once that purpose has been achieved and you no longer need the data, you don't need to retain the data in identifiable form, don't. Because you will save yourself a boatload of trouble. Not only in terms of potential errors on the part of employees, but also intentional. There are rogue employees, there are people who are contact from the outside, contact individuals to obtain information. These things happen all the time. And over a quarter of the companies that had data breaches did not have a data breach plan. And if your department doesn't have a data breach plan, I urge you, when you leave today, go back and talk to someone and just say, please, can we introduce a data breach plan? Hopefully we'll never have to use it. That would be ideal. But in the unlikely event that we have to use it, we'll know exactly what to do, and it will make the difference between night and day in terms of what happened. Now, the next slide. Earlier, I mentioned Target. Target is just such a good example of a horrible case. They spent $146 million to date, and that has not ended, to resolve the data breach that they had related to this case in the fourth quarter of 2013. Look at how far away that was. This has been going on for years. What happened initially, in the next slide, the CEO of Target in the United States, he resigned. The fallout was so dramatic in their data breach that he resigned. And the next slide, you'll see that the president of Target Canada was fired. As you very well know, there is no longer a Target Canada. It just didn't, I mean, for many reasons, but this was among the top ones. It just didn't survive the fallout. And even though there's no Target Canada, in the U.S., they still have a class action lawsuit in excess of $41 million that is ongoing. So can you imagine all of this for years? The fallout is happening. There's only one example. In the next slide, certainly it wasn't just Target. There have been many other cases of companies that have been dramatically impacted. And of course, it's not just private sector companies. In the U.S., in the next slide, the Office of Personnel Management was dramatically impacted. 21.5 million records were stolen. And it was just completely unacceptable. This could have been avoided. The director of OPM resigned. Their CIO resigned. And they just didn't have a mechanism to detect outside intrusion in any way until it was too late. And they didn't have any kind of proper encryption in terms of sensitive data that they had in their collection and use. So it was just a lose-lose all across the board. Now, in the next slide, I do have to mention that Canadian government websites have also been impacted by cyber attack deals. Here's one. The cyber attack crashed the federal government websites and emails for nearly 2 hours, an incident that raised questions about how capable all these computer systems were of withstanding a sustained assault on their security. Obviously, security is critical. In the next slide, this continued in terms of how often and how prolonged it was, and it was suspected that the hacktivist group Anonymous was doing this particular breach because they were very upset about Bill C-51 and its passage, and they wanted to protest. I don't know if many of you are familiar with C-51. It's one of my favorite bills, and I keep reminding Prime Minister Trudeau of his promises that he made when he was not yet Prime Minister. He said that if he was elected Prime Minister, he would significantly amend Bill C-51, which he was not pleased with at the time. So I know that there have been repeated communications with his office inquiring as to when that might take place. In the next slide, there's a reference to the number of privacy breaches that happened last year. 5,670 privacy breaches that took place last year, and the CRA was the worst offender. This involved almost 46,000 people were reported to have their data breached by federal government departments in 2015. 305 breaches involved over 17,000 people and were serious enough to report to the Privacy Commissioner. And as I mentioned, the CRA was the worst offender, responsible for closely 4,000 breaches. And I think one of the reasons that concerns a lot of people with the CRA is, your tax data, your income data is so sensitive. Next to health information, financial data is considered to be the most sensitive data out there. And when we entrust it to the government, because we are required to by law, there's a special duty of care that should be associated with that information. There certainly is that expectation on the part of citizens. So I'm sure that the CRA is going great lengths to improve security and protect the data. In the next slide, we talk about arguably a more lighthearted breach, although the people I heard from didn't think of it as that lighthearted. I'm talking about the Ashley Madison breach. Now, I have to tell you, and I guess a bit of a prude. I like my husband being loyal to me, and vice versa. But if you were going to do this, and I'm not trying to be small-minded. People want to have affairs, by all means, it's your business. But be smart about it. I think that's the part that I don't get. If you want to do this, you want to cheat on your spouse, and you don't want them to know about it, going to a website and using your identifiable data, your real name and all that, this would not be like the smartest thing to do. But I will stop on that note. Okay, so Ashley Madison, for any of you who haven't heard about this, their email accounts and addresses, personal information of 32 million people, the site's members, were hacked. And the hacker group, and I don't think it was anonymous, but it wasn't clear, they claimed two motivations. Ashley Madison's core mission of arranging affairs between married individuals. They objected to that. So I will say no more on that. And Ashley businesses, their business practices, this kills me. If you're a member of Ashley Madison and you want to make sure that your data is deleted after you leave Ashley Madison, you pay $19, and for that fee, they promise to delete the information. Okay, good that, secure destruction of data and all that. You pay your $19. They don't delete your data. So, it's bad enough. They don't delete your data, and then your spouse finds out about it. See what I did? They deleted it. Next slide. I was asked to do an op-ed on this, which tongue-in-cheek, I did, and I really tried to keep all my moral objections out of this, because that's not the role I should be playing. But I just made the point that don't think that information you put online, even if you think it's secure, that it can't be accessed by others unless you definitely know strong encryption, end-to-end. You can guarantee the data is destructed afterwards. I mean, this is really sensitive information we're talking about. So take the time to explore what you're doing online. I would say it shouldn't be the individual's sole responsibility. When you go online, there's only so much you can do to protect your data, but there's some things that you can do. You shouldn't assume nothing, that you don't play a role. You have to play a role and get a little more active in the protection of your data, if you in fact want it to remain secure. If you don't care, no problem. The aftermath of the Ashley Madison case, I heard from so many people. A lot of divorces, as you might think. Some people committed suicide who had been on the site. I mean, very tragic consequences. So it's not just a lark. We have to take this very seriously.